Thank you. The final item of business is a members' business debate on motion 19517 in the name of Emma Harper on women, peace and security. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Can I ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now? And I call on Emma Harper to open the debate. Ms Harper, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to bring this important and now it seems really timely debate forward on UN Security Council Resolution number 1325 about women, peace and security. And I'd like to start by thanking my MSP colleagues who have signed my motion, which allows us to discuss the progress that we have made towards Resolution 1325 and raise awareness today about what this all means, as well as present the importance of security, both in terms of our country of Scotland and our population. I'd also like to put my thanks on the record to Janet Fenton and teams from Scottish CND and Peace Through Inclusion Scotland. Janet and her team have been hugely important voices for peace and must be commended for their continued work. And I welcome Janet and others to the gallery here today. It's important to outline that we're talking about security. We're not just referring to physical borders and conflict. We're talking about security of our population from poverty, of freedom from persecution, of the protection of women from conflict and the promotion of human rights. Right? We need to demilitarise the language of security and not just use it for ceasefires and defence. Security is about access to a just and fair legal system and is about the responsibility of us in this Parliament to ensure the well-being of the people we represent and of the wider international community. This debate provides us with an opportunity to stress the importance of peace and security, both in Scotland and around the world, particularly at a time of rising international tensions, the break-up of political unions and strained relationships as well. Presiding Officer, 20 years ago, on the 31st of October 2000, the UN Security Council unanimously passed Resolution 1325. It's a different type of resolution, and it's the first of its kind with an aim of specifically addressing the impact of war on women and the value of women in conflict resolution and international peace, so women can promote international peace, security and inclusion. While most resolutions talk about combatants and set rules for engagement and conflict resolution, SCR 1325 specifically highlights how women and girls are affected by armed conflict, by sexual violence that occurs during conflict situations, and it also talks about how women are treated by combatants. It aims to achieve the protection of women and girls and promote the importance of women in conflict resolution. It sets out 4 key demands which all member states have agreed to implement. First, states must ensure the eradication and prevention of gender-based violence. Second, member states must ensure measures are put in place which allow for the relief and recovery of women affected by armed conflict. Third, member states must ensure the human rights as set out by the United Nations of women and girls are protected during armed conflict. And fourth and final demand is that member states must enact measures to promote women and girls into positions which allow for peace building and conflict resolution. The question now is, though, what progress has been made since the passing of the resolution 20 years ago, and what steps have been taken in Scotland and the rest of the UK to work towards the aims of the resolution. In 2010, the UK joined 36 other UN member states in adopting a national action plan which commits the Ministry of Defence, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the UK Defence Forces to a range of activities to integrate women, peace and security issues into the UK's conflict policy. The National Action Plan is the UK's highest level strategy on women's protection and for the promotion of women in conflict resolution. The plan has been successful to a certain extent and has led to several successful campaigns, such as No Girl Left Behind. That's helping girls from priority countries to access good quality sanitation, education and access other experiences that they might not otherwise be able to. The plan has also been the catalyst for a culture change within the UK government on the importance of women serving on our international and humanitarian peacekeeping missions. It has led to an understanding that women bring a different perspective to the table, a perspective which often focuses more on humanity, on healthcare, on education, on sanitation, and not just ceasefire talks. However, whilst there is much to welcome, a review carried out in 2019 identified several areas which must still be improved if the UK Government is to achieve the themes of the resolution. In contrast, I'd like to focus on how the Scottish Government, despite not having control over foreign or international policy, is working towards the values set out in Resolution 1325. Here in Scotland, we have already introduced trailblazing policies for the incorporation of women into positions of power and for women to play their part in mediation and conflict resolution. We have, under the First Minister, introduced policies to help vulnerable women and girls around the world flee war and conflict and come to Scotland where their rights are enshrined in law. We've introduced policies such as Equally Safe, Scotland's strategy for preventing and eradicating violence against women and girls. At the heart of Equally Safe is the principle that all women and girls, regardless of background, race, religion or sexual orientation, should feel safe in our communities and should be without fear of violence and abuse. Internationally, Scotland, working in partnership with the UN, has pledged practical and financial support for Syrian women and girls to learn peace-building and conflict resolution skills. In a programme which runs over 3 days and consists of talks, seminars and lessons, women and girls have access to international peacekeeping experts, female role models in positions of power, and can learn from each other about the fundamentals of peacekeeping. This has already proved to have a lasting and positive impact on the individuals who are taking part. In doing so, it has the aim of playing a part in delivering a fair and lasting peace settlement for Syria, one which is shaped by women as well as men. Presiding Officer, our First Minister was the first world leader to address the United Nations General Assembly to discuss the importance of women playing our part internationally. The First Minister spoke of the importance of societies and countries having a focus on welfare and of peace promotion. And briefly, to name a few other ways that Scotland is meeting the targets set out in the resolution, we have gender-based cabinet, equal representation on our public boards. All residents living in Scotland will have the right to vote in Scottish elections and to stand for this Parliament. And most importantly, we have a dedicated Minister for Equalities and a commitment to upholding women's rights. And I would urge the UK Government to appoint an Equalities Minister as soon as possible as well. The incorporation of the United Nations rights of the child into Scots law is another measure which means that girls moving to Scotland, particularly from countries affected by conflict, will be supported and will have their rights set in statute. There is much progress which has been made, but obviously still more to go. I'm proud of our record in Scotland, and I believe it shows the potential of what more could be done should this Parliament have powers over foreign affairs, or better still, all the powers as a normal, independent country. That's what I say. Presiding Officer, current political situations such as rising tensions caused by the President Trump administration in the Middle East, Brexit and the repositioning of the UK on the international stage is causing much uncertainty and concern. These political situations leave Scotland in a difficult diplomatic situation, and the UK must culture good relationships in order to broker trade agreements. So, more than ever, it's important to build peace, to ensure security, and particularly to ensure we're looking out for women and girls. I look forward to hearing the contribution from other members this evening, and I look forward to the progress and actions on this resolution until November 2020 and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Harper. I call Rona Mackay to be followed by Maurice Corrie. Ms Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank my colleague Emma Harper for bringing this important and very timely debate to the Chamber. The words women, peace and security suggest a very positive, comforting image at a time when we've just witnessed a very frightening start to the decade. The President of the United States ordering of the assassination of Iran's Qasem Soleimani has made the world an infinitely more dangerous place, one where peace and security are ever more threatened. That's why, more than ever, the UN National Security Resolution on Women, Peace and Security, passed 2 decades ago, is so relevant today. It specifically addresses the impact of war on women and, as Emma Harper's motion says, the important contribution women have made to the peace movement over the decades. The United States National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security was adopted when President Barack Obama signed an executive order in December 2011, 11 years after the Security Council adopted Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. The goal of the National Action Plan is simple and profound: to empower half the world's population as equal partners in preventing conflict and building peace in countries threatened and affected by war, violence and insecurity. Surely this is the world we strive for, not warmongering and macho territorial power play. Women must become equal partners to avoid more deadly conflicts, where innocent civilians, far too many of them women and children, become victims. Women's voices must be heard and children must be protected from military violence. Presiding Officer, we know that countries are more peaceful and prosperous when women are accorded full and equal rights and opportunity. When those rights and opportunities are denied, countries and their citizens suffer. The UK's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security sets out a 5-year strategy from 2018 to 2022 with the aim of achieving gender equality while building more stable, non-confrontational societies for all. Of course, there is more to do, but Scotland is achieving much already with a gender-balanced cabinet and government, Minister for Equalities, increased representation of women in public life, the Equally Safe strategy mentioned by Emma Harper, and many other initiatives, which are unfortunately not measured because we don't sit on the Security Council. Notwithstanding that anomaly, I'm confident that Scotland will continue to lead the way in gender equality, recognising women as the peacemakers in our country and in global society. Presiding Officer, it's long been recognised that women are the peacemakers. No less than 50 women peace campaigners and pacifists in the UK are listed in Wikipedia, many of whom are Scots. With some exceptions, we don't want war and confrontation. I and the party I represent want to rid Scotland and the world of nuclear weapons. But it's not just about military action. It is about humanity, as Emma Harper said. Women want a world where our children can grow up safely and happily, understanding each other's differences and respecting them. And for me, never has the phrase "Bairns, not bombs" had more meaning than in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Maurice Corrie to be followed by Annabel Ewing. Mr. Corrie.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I gladly join two members in welcoming this debate, and I thank Emma Harper for her motion tonight. Across every country, whether they have suffered conflict or not, women and girls deserve not just protection, but a concerted effort to promote their skills and contribution toward peacekeeping. And the UN Resolution 1325 embodies this sentiment entirely. Unanimously adopted in 2000, this move marked the first time that the unique impact of war and conflict on women and girls was taken into serious consideration. And not only this, it addressed the need for a greater fervour in actively encouraging women's role in peacekeeping and indeed in conflict resolution. First, we need to realise that the women's experience of conflict is distinct in and of itself. The UNSCR 1325 recognises this, and soberingly, women and girls are more at risk of gender-based violence in situations of conflict, and this remains one of the most notable human rights violations worldwide. Gender-based violence is often linked with poverty, founded in the power inequalities evident between men and women. But evidence has shown that with improved equality, a state is much more likely to enjoy peace. For this to happen, states need to endorse the resolution's pillar of protection. Protection not just amid war, but in the face of its consequences, poverty and refugee crisis, for example. Evident in its pillar of participation, the UN resolution embodies the view that women are key agents in the peace process, and particularly in making it as long-lasting and sustainable as possible. Indeed, research has shown that women's involvement at key levels of decision-making can help to bring immense benefits. For instance, in 2011, International Peace Institute study found that when women are included in the peace process, there are at least 35% increase in the probability that the peace agreement will be kept for 15 years or more. In general, for more peaceful ends to conflict, inclusivity born from a grassroots level is vital. And the affirmation which the UN's resolution provides encourages equal participation and involvement of men or women at local or national level and of any ethnicity. It is vital that Scotland is at the forefront of promoting women, peace and security, and indeed the UK adopted its National Action Plan in support of this movement in 2006, and many other UN member states have since done so in the same way. And indeed, in early 2019, we saw the commitment of 9 member states to develop the first ever national action plans in advance of October 2020. And of course, while there has been some improvement in recent years, there is still much more work to be done. And for instance, only 43% of UN member states have adopted these national action plans, and not all of these are as far-reaching as they could be. Most fail to reference disarmament policy, and many do not include an allocated budget for implementing their plan. Scotland has long charted its path towards active encouragement and protection of women in the face of conflict. For instance, through Scotland's Women in Conflict Fellowship, women can build on fundamental communication and negotiation skills designed to resolve conflict, which has been effective in training female peace mediators from Syria. Steps such as these contribute towards a significant breaking down of barriers. And to conclude, Deputy Presiding Officer, I hope that today brings our Parliament a renewed motivation to advocate for women's protection worldwide and to promote their much-needed role in peacekeeping efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Corrie. I call Annabel Ewing to be followed by Joanne Lamont. Ms Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I also am pleased to have been called to speak in the debate this evening. I congratulate my colleague Emma Harper on securing this debate on women, peace and security. And as we have already heard, the debate focuses on UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which was passed, as we've heard, unanimously nearly 20 years ago on the 31st of October 2000. And in passing this historic resolution, the UN reaffirmed the important role women play in conflict prevention, conflict resolution and peace building. The UN also recognised that the protection of women and girls and their participation in peace processes is important to the very goal of international peace and security itself. As far as the operational elements of Resolution 1325 are concerned, the UN member states are called upon inter alia to prevent sexual and gender-based violence and armed conflict, to protect women and girls in refugee settings, very opposite in terms of today's world, to support local women's peace initiatives, and I'm very pleased too to welcome Janet Fenton and her CND colleagues tonight to the gallery, and to increase women's political participation at all levels of decision-making in national, regional and international institutions. And indeed, it is interesting to note that in the background to this resolution, this historic UN resolution, there was in fact a considerable degree of NGO and civil society involvement in the drafting of the resolution, and also that the two-day debate on the resolution by the UN Security Council was the first time that the Council dedicated a discussion to women. And perhaps, Presiding Officer, if this was a more frequent occurrence, the world would be a very different place today. In 2009, a further resolution fleshed out how matters were to be taken forward, with the so-called 4 pillars of implementation being prevention, protection, participation and relief and recovery. And UN member states are required to implement these tenets through national action plans. It is to be noted that progress in this regard has been patchy so far, I think we could say, because as of September of this year, in fact, only 77 countries had adopted such national action plans. Moreover, there has been little evidence of impacts in conflict-affected countries, albeit that there is a recognition that more data is needed to track results more comprehensively. However, at the same time, we can see positive outcomes in the way in which this debate is now framed, with increased attention to the issue of women and conflict within the United Nations and its member states. And as we have heard here in Scotland, it is pleasing to note that significant progress has been made within the broad parameters of the goals sought by this UN resolution. And of course, we have seen the securing of a gender-balanced cabinet. We have seen the establishment of a National Advisory Council on Women and Girls. We have seen the funding of work to tackle violence against women and girls. We have seen new legislation on female genital mutilation, on forced marriages, and of course proposed legislation to provide a clear statutory basis for health boards to deliver forensic medical examinations, a key issue. And indeed, I'm very pleased to have been at the opening of the new forensic suite at the Queen Margaret Hospital in Dunfermline, which serves also my constituency of Cowdenbeath. And that really was as a result of dedicated work by local volunteers and the medical staff themselves. So very well done to them. But in conclusion, Presiding Officer, much has been achieved, but of course within the overarching objective, the international goal of women, peace and security, much more needs to be done. And it perhaps therefore would be apt to close by quoting from the late great Ivor Cutler, whose famous song, Women of the World, was recently recorded by the fabulous Corinne Polwart in her Scottish Songbook album. Ivor Cutler wrote, and I quote, "Women of the world, take over, because if you don't, the world will come to an end." And we haven't got long. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I call Joanne Lamont, followed by Alison Johnson. Ms Lamont.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'm happy to participate in this challenging debate, and I want to thank Emma Harper for securing the time for it. I'm pleased to add my few comments to what I think is an important opportunity to underline the specific experience of women in war and the role of women in securing peace. There is no doubt in a world where women experience male violence on a daily basis, in their homes, in their workplace, in their communities, and we've seen so many more examples of it in the last few weeks, that there is as great a need as ever to emphasise the sex-based causes of violence and trauma in all too many women's lives, and the experience of women across the world, regardless of the constitutional arrangements within which they live. And it is about understanding those causes. This debate highlights the way in which women in war experience not just the horror that war itself brings, but are victims of rape and sexual violence and abuse, and where rape becomes a strategic weapon of war, not just as individual atrocity, but a purposefully planned means of subjugating whole communities. And I want, in the brief time I have, to highlight the experience of women in Bosnia in the conflict and genocide in the 90s. And I should mention, in terms of my register of interest, that I'm proud to be a board member of Remember Srebrenica Scotland, a charity alongside groups across the United Kingdom dedicated to ensuring there's a greater understanding of that conflict, of the steps that led to genocide, and to supporting those in Bosnia seeking to educate us all in how we might ensure such genocide anywhere in the world is prevented in the future. In Bosnia, thousands of men and boys were massacred and left in mass graves. The fact that men and boys were victims allowed the Serbs to deny genocide by claiming that these men and boys, some as young as 11, were of fighting age. But these were not the only atrocities. The sex-based nature of the violence visited upon the people of Bosnia was its most obvious in the systematic use of rape as a weapon of war. Thousands of women were subjected to sexual violence during the war, and for a long time their stories went untold through shame, stigma, and the challenge of survivors to rebuild their lives sufficiently to speak out. In recent years that has changed. Women have broken the silence. Led by an inspirational woman, Bakira Hasczyk, the Association of Women Victims of War sought to find a way of unifying women survivors and ensuring that their experience and their lives and what had happened to them were known to the rest of us. If genocide seeks to destroy people, it must also destroy family life. And this is where sexual violence and rape in public is used to humiliate, degrade and destroy, cynical, planned and brutal in its purpose. We need to understand the threat to women, but also the power of women like Bakira in speaking out and find ways to support women who have suffered in war in this way. It also means we need to understand male violence, unleashed in its most horrific form as an act of war, but in order that we can change the attitudes that create the possibility of this happening at all. In supporting women, in challenging the conditioning of men, in understanding the reality of male violence, we can play a part in building peace in our communities and across the world, an aspiration that this resolution represents, but it's something that we can do now here and with support of others right across the world.
Thank you very much, Ms Lamb. I call Alison Johnson, to be followed by Beatrice Wishart. Ms Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Emma Harper for bringing this debate to the Chamber this evening. Women, peace and security is an issue that is close to many women's hearts, and I'm sure we're agreed that all in society should be looking to ensure that in the arena of conflict and violence, women should not only have a voice, but should be encouraged to be active participants in seeking resolution, mediation and compromise. Sadly, there are very few societies in the world that we can call truly peaceful, and sometimes our view that Scotland is a peaceful society and that violence and conflict only happen overseas can blind us to a lack of peace on our own soil. Can there be true peace for the girl who witnesses domestic violence, drug or alcohol abuse at home? Can there be true peace for the girl who has learned to hate herself so much that she cuts herself and pulls out her own hair? Can there be real peace for the young women experiencing sexual harassment. Presiding Officer, I believe it is important that Scotland takes its place on the world stage and advocates for an end to armed conflict and for an end to rape as a weapon of war. It's important that Scotland takes responsibility for its own contribution to violence and death around the globe by supporting the arms industry with public money. And at the same time, we need to ask, are we really doing our best to create a society where women and girls aren't silently bearing the burden of violence and inequality in their physical and their mental health? Now, I'm sure that all in this chamber recognise that violence isn't always achieved with knives or guns. Violence can be soft and quiet. It can be being spat at in the street for wearing the hijab. It can be the wholly disproportionate impact of austerity on women and children, or the trafficking and sexual exploitation of women. Presiding Officer, I could go on, and the list of ways women experience violence can appear to be an insurmountable thing to tackle both at home and abroad, but there is impactful work to be done. Violence against women is a cause and consequence of gender inequality. 49 countries don't have laws that protect women from domestic violence. We continue to fight against the gender pay gap here. In 18 countries, women need their husband's permission simply to go to work. So it may seem small in comparison with global conflicts, but work such as equipping women from an early age with skills like peer mediation so they can negotiate tricky problems that they might face at school, at further education or in the world of work is important. Making sure that young women have adequate access to mental health support and that they see being healthy is about more than just being thin is important. Supporting initiatives like the Parliament Project, which encourages women of any age or political persuasion to run for office, to get their voice heard across the UK is important. We have to work hard to give voice to some of the most marginalised women, such as those who seek asylum from conflicts here in Scotland, to make sure they feel as though not only can they take part equally in civil society if this is their newly adopted country, but that they're valued in it. Presiding Officer, would it not be a fine thing to see elected in this chamber one day a woman of colour? Indeed, this is long overdue. But we need to see women in this chamber who have sought and be given refuge here, women who contribute to Scotland and help raise all our perceptions about Scotland's place and responsibilities within the world, and Scotland's responsibility in helping women achieve peace, whether it's personal, communal, national or international. There are valuable lessons that we can learn from women around the world. Rwanda has a cohort of formidable and inspiring women who, after the genocide there, became politicians and activists working hard to achieve peace in the aftermath of atrocity. They've learned hard lessons. They now have an equal amount of girls to boys in education, increased participation of women in the country's democratic processes and in conflict handling. These lessons from other countries can be ones that we can also learn from. They can inspire us and show us new ways of doing and being. In closing, Presiding Officer, I'd like to thank the Greenham Common women who protested against NATO's decision to site American cruise missiles at the Berkshire site. Margaret Thatcher, would you believe, called them an eccentricity. They're truly essential. They're wholly admirable. I'd like to thank Angie Zeltzer and the Trident 3, who were jointly awarded the Right Livelihood Award. I'd like to thank Trident Ploughshares, CND. I'd like to thank Janet Fenton, Vice Chair of Scottish CND, for her relentless pursuit of peace. And I'd like to thank the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, who address the root causes of violence through a feminist lens. Presiding Officer, thank you.
Thank you. And I now call on Beatrice Wishart to be followed by Stuart Stevenson. Mr Stevenson is the last speaker in the open debate. Ms Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too would like to congratulate Emma Harper on securing this important debate. It is a timely one. The year has started with a worrying escalation in tensions between the US and Iran, as others here have highlighted, and there is an urgent need to de-escalate the situation. Civilians in the area have already suffered through years of turbulence, violence and upheaval. By adding fresh fuel to these fires, the prospect of calm again seems distant. The human cost of that should never be sidelined in favour of politics. Conflict dynamics are complex. Various factors such as economic inequality, political oppression, ethnic tensions, gender-based violence, climate change and much more combine to lead to conflict. Women and girls are raped, kidnapped, forced to flee bombing raids with their children, deal with the impact of financial sanctions, bury husbands, brothers and sons, and never see any justice. Too often women bear the brunt of conflicts while having little influence or control over the circumstances that led to the conflict in the first place or its resolution. Importantly, in highlighting the need to ensure women are fully involved in peace-building processes, it's important to avoid falling into the trap of essentialising. For centuries, women have been stereotyped as naturally peaceful, caring, but at the same time irrational, disqualifying them from the pressures of high office. Men, correspondingly, have been typecast as aggressive or decisive natural leaders. We know how damaging these assumptions can be to both men and women. The point, therefore, is not that the President of the US and the Iranian military leaders, if they'd been female, then this escalation would never have happened, but rather in ensuring that a range of views and perspectives are expressed in decision-making processes, which means that the people making decisions are at least representative of the people they ultimately affect. Sometimes that might even lead to a different outcome. And that means practicing a foreign agenda with gender equality at its heart. It means transforming the position of women through economic inclusion, education and training, and working to extend rights and responsibilities. It's stating the obvious to say plans or interventions that are made without the input and experiences of 50% of the population are unlikely to generate change. The effect women had at Greenham Common, as Alison Johnson highlighted, in the 1980s is a prime example. Women I know stood up for what they believed in there, peace, and they managed to effect real change. It's nearly 20 years since I became president of the local Rotary Club, an organisation that was often considered pale, male and stale. But globally, it was one that I became aware of, the Rotary International Programme of Peace Fellowships, where globally they brought people together to bring skills for peace and conflict prevention and resolution. I was also delighted to become the first woman to represent the Shetland constituency, and I know that others in Parliament here feel similarly for their seats too. If there's any silver lining to be taken from the recent general election result, it's that there's a record number of female MPs in Westminster. The number stands at 220 compared with 208 in 2017, but this headway still feels fragile. Imbalance remains, and in 2020 there can be no reason for this kind of disparity. Making decisions is not just a man's job. As we enter a new decade, surely it's time for a change. I support the motion and its objectives.
Thank you very much, Ms Bishop. And I call Stuart Stevenson, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and let me congratulate my colleague Emma Harper on allowing us the opportunity to debate the important subject. The whole debate is anchored on Resolution 1325. It doesn't, of course, stand alone in Security Council resolutions. There have been significant numbers since then, culminating on this subject on Resolution 2493, which was passed last year. So 20 years have passed, the United Nations Security Council continues to have resolutions on this subject. And I think that illustrates something very important, that if fine words in the Security Council, fine words in this Parliament, are of limited value. They set examples, they set frameworks, but they don't actually solve the problem. We do know there are women out there who are leaders in the fight for peace and who are examples to us. For me, I would say Mother Teresa is a great example as a humanitarian. Mary Robinson is a great example as a champion in the climate change and particularly the effects on women. And of course, 17-year-old Greta Thunberg is leading the way in persuading people of all genders across the world of the importance of creating a safe and secure world in which we can all live. We know, if we look at our prisons, the overwhelming majority of people who are in prison are men. They're not women. So we know that in practice, men are relatively likely to be predisposed to violent and extra-social, against the social norms, behaviours that lead to their being convicted and put in prison. Now, we shouldn't pretend, of course, there aren't women out there who espouse violence. Boudica, the Amazonian women, perhaps Golda Meir as well. So women can get engaged in violence, but very much the exception, not the rule. The 2011 Nobel Peace Prize was won by 3 women. That was a first. I hope it will not, by any means, be the last. Women's achievements are manifold across many parts of our society. In the New Year's Honours List, which has just so recently been published, I'm not a great fan of honours, but look at them for what they are. In Scotland, 60% of the awards in Scotland were actually to women, which tells us the enormous contribution of women to our society. But I think in this domain, there's an important couple of things we might focus on. That we've talked primarily in the debate about the role of women in making peace after violence, after war. There is an equally and perhaps even more important role in women preventing war in the first place. And I think that's why it's very important that around the world we're seeing an increased number of women as prime ministers, as presidents, taking leadership roles in a place where they may be more likely to prevent violence in the first place, because prevention is so much better in this domain of activity than cure. That's for sure. We've also got to think about what goes on in the minds of people who espouse violence. And I think in particular of men who, as I exemplified earlier, are perhaps more likely to be disposed towards violence. And I think there are 3 things we can look at here. We can be trained as men to respond to particular situations, and we can do so in this domain as in others. We can acquire skills and knowledge that help us reason a way through problems that we have not previously considered and have not thought about. But the most important of responses is the autonomic response, the automatic response which happens unthinkingly. And we need to take actions that will program men in future generations to respond in a way that is more appropriate to the needs of the world and the needs of peace. But finally, presiding officer, let's not imagine that women perpetually have to be victims in all this. Victims are the answer, not women are the answer, not the problem.
Thank you. And I call on Christina McKelvey to close to the Government. Minister, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. What an absolutely fantastic and fascinating debate that we had tonight. Can I join other members in thanking Emma Harper for bringing the debate to the Chamber? The motion raises key issues about the importance of equality, highlighting, as it does, the role of women in promoting international peace and security. Can I welcome to the gallery Janet Fenton, someone who I've followed for many years, including watching what she was doing and what the women at Greenham Common were doing when I was a teenager growing up in the 70s and the 80s. A real inspiration. And also Gary Dawn, who's the director of UN House, our very own Women's UN House in Edinburgh as well. Can I also join Beatrice Wishart and Rona Mackay in their concerns about the start of this year, the macho conflict, way that some people deal with it and the disproportionate impact that has on women. I have the same concerns that both Rona and Beatrice raised in their contributions too. Presiding Officer, almost 20 years on from the unanimous adoption of the Security Council Resolution 1325, there is still much work to do to increase the understanding of the specific and disproportionate impact of war and conflict on women and girls. And we've heard from many speakers today, Stuart Stevenson and Joanne Lamont and Alison Johnson, on that very impact too. Stuart Stevenson did remind us that there continues to be more resolutions, which tells us there is more work to do. In October, at the UN Security Council open debate on women, peace and security in New York, the UN Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women, Fumzio Malambo Nguka, I think I've pronounced that properly, said, "The loud and common message is, progress is too slow, political will is not strong enough, and pushback against the needs and interests of women is threatening the progress we have made and pushing further away those who need the resolve and the support most." We could not agree with her more. This is one of the reasons why it is important that this Parliament affirms and reaffirms its commitment to do what we can within its powers to raise awareness of the issues that the resolution addresses. And Beatrice Wishart reminded us in her contribution of the damage of the assumptions and stereotypes, and her work in the Rotary Club and its peace fellowships. I'm going to talk a bit about the Scottish Government's peace fellowships as well, so she'll see a lot of common ground in that. And Emma Harper asked us asked us what steps have we taken in Scotland. So I'm going to address some of those steps now. We have already taken a number of practical steps to increase protection for women and girls and to promote gender equality. Since 2007, we have strengthened the law on violence against women and girls, introducing the Forced Marriage, etc. Protection and Jurisdiction Scotland Act 2011 and the Abusive Behaviour and Sexual Harm Scotland Act 2015. With COSLA, our local government partners, we have published Equally Safe, Scotland's strategy to eradicate all forms of violence against women and girls in 2018. And Emma Harper made specific reference to this as trailblazing. She is correct, but we do know there is still work to do. And Rona Mackay told us that our progress is not measured because we don't currently have a seat on the Security Council, something we wish to remedy in the near future. We have invested in services for women and children who have experienced or are experiencing violence, including to support the Women's Aid and Rape Crisis Networks, an incredible part of the work that we do here. We have also demonstrated our commitment to women's representation in senior positions by appointing a gender-balanced cabinet, as we've heard, only one of a few across the whole world, and establishing the Partnership for Change 50-50 by 2020 pledge. That commitment has given global recognition last year when the First Minister was appointed by the UN Women as an inaugural global advocate for the UN's He for She campaign. Alison Johnson reminded about the work of this place, the Parliament Project, wonderful experience, and I was here at the last one. This chamber was filled with women. I'd quite like to see that in 2020. That's not to say our glorious men in this chamber should be pushed out, but we would like to have more women here. Also, you know, that intersectionality, having a refugee women here, having our black ethnic minority women represented in this place, looking at the work that was done in Rwanda post-conflict and how they used that to build for peace. And Beatrice Wishart said, and I've used her as a quote and I might use it again, making decision is just not a man's job, and she's absolutely right. More recently, we have established the National Advisory Council on Women and Girls. This provides the First Minister with strategic advice about where the Scottish Government needs to take gender action to end gender inequality. We've also published a Fairer Scotland for Women, the Gender Pay Gap Action Plan in March 2019 to take an intersectional approach to tackling women's inequality in the labour market, invested significantly in a transformational expansion of childcare provision and committed to deliver a women's health plan in 2020. Within the last 2 years, this Parliament has passed the Gender Representation in Public Boards Scotland Act to improve women's representation on the boards of listed public authorities. We gave them a couple of years to do it, but they've done it 2 years ahead of schedule, and we currently have sitting with 50-50 representation across all of those organisations. Annabel Ewan also added a few to that list, the FGM bill, which we have the update going through Parliament right now, and the very important forensic medical examination, and she paid tribute to the dedicated work by local volunteers, and she was absolutely right to do so, and I support her in that. The other piece of legislation that we've had recently is the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2018, and this act created a specific offence of domestic abuse that covers not just physical abuse, but also other forms of psychological abuse and coercive and controlling behaviour. And Joanne Lamont reminded us of the conflict in Bosnia and the use of rape as a weapon of war. I pay tribute to her and the work of Bukina, I think that's the right pronunciation as well, and her bravery in not just telling a story that's hard to hear, but it's a story that we must hear in order to learn the lessons from that. But what are we doing internationally, I hear you ask? We are promoting equality and enhancing the prospects for peace. Scotland is dedicated to being a good global citizen, working with organisations, initiatives and projects in countries around the globe to ensure that everyone benefits from a safer world. One such example of this is the Women in Conflict Fellowship, inspired by Resolution 1325, which was put in place to train women from areas of conflict around the world so that they can play an integral role in the peace process. And both Alison Johnson and Stuart Stevenson reminded us that prevention is an important aspect of this work, and it surely is. This Scottish Government initiative started back in 2015 and since then has had some great successes. Each year, along with our partners beyond borders, we have welcomed at least 50 women from countries affected by conflict to take part in our fellowship programme. Together, we ensure that they have the skills and confidence to maximise their contribution to building a safer world. In 2017, we doubled down on this commitment by announcing a total of £1.25 million to the fellowship over its 4-year lifespan. Alison Johnson asked, can there be real peace here in Scotland and internationally? I would hope some of that work would answer some of that question that we are working towards that. This fellowship, I believe, enhances and develops Scotland's role as a peacemaking hub and as a platform for providing a safe space for parties to come together and engage in fruitful discussion. Scotland's unique, peaceful history of political settlement and devolution allows constitutional political experts to be involved and to share the knowledge. The benefits of the fellowship have already been seen, as explained. 3 women trained through the fellowship are now actively engaged as members of the UN Special Envoy Women's Advisory Board in the Yemeni peace process. Furthermore, the Scottish Government is funding 2 additional workshops for 1325 Women in Conflict Fellowship alumni in January and February this year. This will support the fellows in building upon their skills and provide specialised support. Incorporation of the UNCRC and the work of the Human Rights Task Force also builds into this, highlighted by Emma Harper. And as the First Minister said when she was first approached to undertake this work, we are proud that the UN asked Scotland to lead on women's peace-making initiative in Syria. Every year we will fund training and capacity building for at least 50 women from affected countries, ensuring that they have the skills and confidence to maximise their contribution to building a safer world. Now, Maurice Corrie gave us a wonderful speech with wonderful words about what we need to do and how we need to do it and realising the benefits of it. But, you know, a wonderful speech is fantastic, but not taking any account of the hostile environment, the vote that was taken yesterday to deny the rights of reunification of families and refugees and EU nationals and all of that. We can't just say, this is a wonderful speech with wonderful words. We need to take account of what we're currently responsible for now and take action on that. Presiding Officer, in closing, we will continue to take action to provide the role of women and girls internationally. We will also continue to encourage the UK Government to use its powers to make progress on this important agenda. And at home, gender equality will remain at the heart of this Scottish Government's vision for a fairer Scotland. Annabel Ewan used the words of Ivor Cutler in her speech. She said, "Women of the world, take over." And I agree with her. We're working on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting of Parliament.